time, I'd like to introduce myself if you don't know me. I'm Shawn Aker. I'm the Cherokee Main Street Director here in Cherokee. And it's my pleasure to have our Senator here with us this morning. I've met Tanner Roberts many times, and it's been always a pleasure to work with him. It's great that he can be here this morning. Thank you, Keith Smith from Post 33, American Legion, that greeted you all this morning. I appreciate him and their work that they do here in the community, as many other entities that we have here in town, as well as the Rotary, the Lions Club, everyone that works all together with Main Street and the city of Cherokee. At this time, would you all stand? I'm going to ask Keith to come up and lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You may be seated. Thank you, Keith. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you Mayor Karen Hawkins, and she has a few words for us, and then we'll move on to Senator Lankford. Thank you.
Good morning. Gosh, lots of friendly faces. It gives me an honor and a privilege to introduce to you our U.S. Senator. And I haven't got her, I know he's aged really well. I have not had the privilege to meet him personally before, but I know he's doing an outstanding job. So if you will stand with me and give the Senator a round of applause as he comes in.
Can you all hear me if I stand from out here? Okay. I can step back there if you need me to on it. So I'm a little deeper and a little quieter than I normally am because I'm breathing this 2 weeks of allergy air. Everybody got that right now? 2 weeks a year. This is in the middle of my 2 weeks here. I'll be able to transition whatever it is. So I appreciate y'all being here for the dialogue. I came with a couple things just to be able to give you an update on, but really I wanted to just be able to answer questions and to be able to hear what people were thinking and your ideas and also your questions about what you're seeing in the media or what you're hearing about. So let me make just a couple of quick comments. I'm going to jump into as many questions as I possibly can for folks. Obviously, there's a lot going on right now in D.C. For Senator Inhofe and I in the Senate, it is a noisy place. As you know, there are two things the Senate works on, though: personnel and policy. And on the policy side, it is not only passing legislation, but it's oversight of legislation that has been passed in the past. So on the policy side, we're doing a lot of oversight. Like, for instance, I just met over the past month with a bunch of pharmaceutical companies, some of the pharmacy benefit folks, to be able to find out what's happening in pharmaceutical pricing, why we're seeing skyrocketing pricing in insulin drugs and asthma drugs, and a lot of other things that we're seeing right now in chemotherapy, that are some of them older drugs, but just the prices are accelerating. So we're trying to meet with those companies to be able to find out what's happening, why this is happening, what we can do to help manage some of those costs on a day-to-day. Also doing a lot of work on the budget preparation for next year. I always have folks, and I tell my staff I dread it each year when the president releases the budget, whether it was President Obama or President Trump. Everyone assumes that is the national budget. It's not. The president's budget is just a document of ideas. That was created in what's called the 1974 Budget Act. Every single president since 1974 has turned in a budget, and every single one of them have not passed. So they're a set of ideas, really, is what it is. And I wish they didn't call it the budget, because everyone thinks that it is the final congressional budget. It's not. It's a set of ideas. So I've already had folks calling me, asking questions about it. If you've got questions about the president's budget, glad to be able to field through some of those. But it won't become law. It is a set of ideas, as it is for every one of them. The House will have a set of ideas. The Senate will have a set of ideas. The President has a set of ideas. Then we'll start the debate to be able to go through them to be able to see where we end up at the end. So that's kind of the beginning point of a lot of the debate, but it's not the final product, if that makes sense. So we're working through that. A lot of national security issues. A month ago, I was in Lebanon and in the border between Syria and Lebanon, meeting with refugees there and trying to figure out what's happening still with Syrian refugees moving. As you know, a lot of those folks were running out of Syria, but they were running for two reasons. One group was running from ISIS, and the other group was running from Assad as the dictator of Syria. Well, the folks that are fled because of ISIS, a lot of those folks are returning. But in Jordan, there's about 2 million people that are there in Jordan that are afraid to go back from Assad. And in Lebanon, there's 1.5 million people that are all in the Bekaa Valley that are afraid to go back because of Assad. Then you've got other folks that are in Turkey in the same thing. Assad's still in Syria. So there is still a refugee challenge in that region that we're helping with our federal tax dollars to try to help manage. But it's the UN and there's a bunch of other countries that are involved in helping manage that as well. But I spent several days there trying to be able to figure out, okay, where are we? What's going on? What's the product? Meeting with the leadership in Lebanon, both with their president and their prime minister, members of their parliament, and then out in the Bekaa Valley. So it is a unique challenge to be able to deal with there. And then also had the opportunity to be able to stop in while I was in the region, to be able to also stop in Israel. I spoke at a conference there that's the first ever conference with Israeli business leaders and Palestinian business leaders. First time ever for them to be able to sit down and to be able to meet. And it's what I think is the foundation for a future peace process. When people that don't necessarily agree with each other figure out how to do business together anyway, it makes a big deal. It was also mayors and muhtars. Isn't that a better title? What do you think? Mayor or muhtar? Which one do you prefer? Muhtar sounds better, doesn't it? So the Israeli side, they're mayors. On the Palestinian side, they're muhtars. Mayors and muhtars also sitting down together because sewage pipe and water and roads and electricity, they don't have political parties. They just need to be done. But mayors and muhtars don't meet together. So we had a conference again to be able to get those two groups together. Long term, it is all of our economic benefits to be able to make some of this happen. So there's a lot of policy areas we're working on with domestic policy and with foreign policy. One last quick thing. Somebody here is going to ask me about the wall. So let's talk about it now so we can get that out. And I'm glad to be able to have ongoing dialogue about the wall and where things are going. 2017, Congress asked the Department of Homeland Security to give definition for border barriers. Is there a need for border barriers? If they are, where are they needed? Because we have a 2,000-mile long border between Mexico and the United States, 2,000 miles. 650 miles of it already has fencing. The last 4 presidents have built fencing along the border between Mexico and the United States. The last 4. Everybody seems to forget that in Washington, D.C., and they think Trump is the first person to ever try to build a fence. The last 4 have all built fencing. That's how we have 650 miles of barrier fencing right now. Now, some of that barrier fencing is not very good. The original barrier fencing that was put up now 25 years ago, that barrier fencing was literally the leftover corrugated metal from Vietnam. In Vietnam, they had this corrugated metal, like what we put on our barns on the top, okay? That same stuff. That corrugated metal we had for Vietnam to be able to put out in the jungle to be able to put a foundation for landing pads for helicopters. We had tons of it left over in storage, and they literally pulled that out of storage, and the first line of barrier is just that corrugated metal on a post attached up there. Now, how many people do you think that's going to stop? No one. Okay, anyway, you can cut right through that stuff. It's not really a barrier other than just a barrier to get something up between the two. So some of our cities, where there's a city on the south and a city on the north, it's just that corrugated metal in between to provide a barrier. The president wants to replace some of that to actually something that does stop people moving back and forth, and then to be able to add about 100 miles of new area where there's now a growing metropolitan area on both sides of the border. Or what they told us in this last report, what the new fencing they want is in the top 10 highest drug trafficking corridors between Mexico and the United States. Homeland Security has said, we want to identify where drugs are moving between the ports of entry and to be able to put a barrier in those spots between the ports of entry. They came back at the end of 2017 with their report. Here's where the highest amount of drug trafficking is moving. We think there needs to be a physical barrier in these spots so that the drug trafficking moves in areas where we have more law enforcement and we can interdict it there and not have to worry about it as much in the other areas. Makes sense. President Trump's request of $5.7 billion was related to that request. Here's the highest drug trafficking areas in the country. Some of those areas in the Texas Rio Grande Valley, between the ports of entry now, in that area, there's a 269% increase in the last 2 years in fentanyl moving in those areas. The most deadly drug moving into the United States right now. 269% increase in 2 years. So it's a tremendous change that's happening in drug trafficking and what we're watching. The amount of methamphetamines have dramatically increased. Cocaine has dramatically increased in the last 4 years. But fentanyl is just overwhelming us right now. So the president's request was for those high drug trafficking corridors and say we want to add fencing in those areas. Congress did not approve it. Obviously, you know the big shutdown fight that happened over that. Congress approved $1.375 billion. Let's round it, $1.4 billion of the $5.7 billion that was requested for the fencing. The president, even before the vote happened, said, I'm going to declare an emergency and I'm going to go after additional funding. So here's what happened. There's really 4 areas of funding. And I know I'm going to get into the details on this, but it matters on it. The one area is for military construction. If the president declares an emergency, he can take some projects that are currently military projects and reallocate them to other areas if there's a declared emergency. The president declared an emergency to do 2 things, to be able to allow those funds to be used, and the second one was to be able to move the reserve to the border to replace some of the guard units that have been there a long time. There have been some guard units there for a while, and he wants to be able to swap them out with some reserves, but you can only do that if you declare an emergency. So that's the first one. The second one is the funding. Now here's what's interesting. Everyone's focused on the funding, but the president's made it really clear he's only going to use that funding if he absolutely has to. He's got 3 other buckets of money that he can do to use it, and if he has to use that military construction money, he'll tap it. But otherwise, he doesn't plan to. He's got the $1.4 billion that was allocated already from Congress. There's a second fund called the Treasury Asset Forfeiture Fund. All you need to know on it is this is a fund that if there is a crime that's committed somewhere in the United States, they pull those funds in. It's usually financial crimes. It's often banks or some other financial transaction. That funding can be used at the discretion of the president for any law enforcement purpose he wants to use it for. So that's $600 million. He says, I'm going to use that money for border barrier. No question he's got the legal authority to do it. The third fund is the Department of Defense has a counter-narcotics fund. $4 billion a year is given every year to help our Department of Defense work with counter-narcotics. President, no question he can use that. In fact, it specifically says in the law, international barrier fencing can be used for this, specifically in the law. The president says I'm going to use a big chunk of that funding as well to be able to use border barriers. There's no question those 3 have legal authority. No question. There's a question on the last one, on the construction for military construction, but he has to declare an emergency on it. But the president's saying he doesn't even want to use it. So the big vote last week in the Senate was really 2 questions. Is it an emergency? And I think the amount of drugs coming across our border right now is an emergency. And the reason he's targeting those areas is because of the drugs. And the second question is, does he have the legal authority to do it? I think it's yes on both. That's why I was a yes on it. Now, we're still going to keep having this fight in Congress because there are lots of folks that say they don't want to have barriers, even though the last 4 presidents have built fencing. For some reason, it's bad when President Trump does. So we're going to keep having the fight on it. I think we need to have it as efficiently as possible. We need to build the barriers as inexpensive as possible. But there are some areas I believe we do need barriers. Where it's open desert, we don't. Because quite frankly, we can see those folks coming across the border. We can pick it up with heat sensing technology at night. Daytime, we can see them in the daytime and go interdict and go get there. You don't need fencing where you can actually get to somebody and to be able to say, what are you doing here? And you got 50 miles to be able to get to them. So that's a doable thing. but in the other areas, we are going to need some kind of barrier. Does that help? All right, what do y'all want to talk about? Those are some of the things I want to be able to just address that are out there, some of the things I've been working on lately.
Responsibility of a veto override.
0 on a veto override. The president's already vetoed it. In fact, Pelosi has been hesitating whether she's going to even bring it up. She knows she doesn't have the vote for a veto override, and so she may not even bring it up. And it's interesting, some of the Democrats, there are a few that are more conservative Democrats left in the House, not many. But of the more conservative Democrats are saying, stop bringing this up. You're killing us on this, because you're pandering to all the new socialists that are in the House. And so they're fighting with Pelosi saying, stop bringing this up. So we'll see what she actually does. I'm not sure we actually even have a vote. But there's 0 chance there's a veto override majority there.
I saw some of the high-profile Republicans in the Senate voted against that. But I hate to see that.
So here's what's interesting. And Jim Inhofe and I had this conversation as well. The question of the day on that vote was, is it an emergency and does the president have authority? Yes on both of those for me. They were trying to, some other colleagues were trying to add a third question to it, which was, should the president have this wide a latitude to declare an emergency? Now, there's no question he does. The 1976 National Emergencies Act gives him the authority. The question is, should that authority have been given that broadly to any president? Well, that's a different question. That's not the question of today. That's the question of tomorrow. There will be some debate. Even President Trump tweeted the day of the event that if Congress wants to re-look at the National Emergencies Act, he's willing to work at that with them. Because the president looked at it and said, should any president have this broad of an authority? Probably not. They should have the ability to be able to declare an emergency. That's the nature of an emergency. You need an executive to do that. But to be able to move funds around, we need to look at that and see. But that's a different question than does he have the authority now? He does.
And to, in a sense, give him the ability to enforce that emergency.
Right. You got to be able to do it. I mean, if there's a flood, if there's a disaster, if there's some national attack, you got to have somebody to be able to respond to it. Yeah.
So is that the reservation about future possibilities of
Yeah, there are several folks that said they feel like this sets the precedent for a new administration to do something like declare climate change a national emergency and move funds around the way they want to. Here's the problem with that theory. That's not what the president's doing. It's not just, I wanted to do something. It is very specific, and it is in statute, like the area on the funding for the counter-narcotics funding. It says specifically in the law it can be used for border barriers. There's not something specific, Yeah, there's not something specifically in law that says you can move funds for climate change, for instance. So that's the argument, and again, that's the great debate in D.C. We'll try to get that resolved. What else? Yes, sir.
As an employer, I'm concerned about this movement to legalize marijuana at the federal level.
I'm
We
too.
have a hard enough time, have a zero tolerance policy at our workplace, on drugs.
Right.
Alcohol is a different matter, but still enough to have.
Sure. Which can't be
controls
intoxicated.
on that, but yet, here I've got another matter, I've got to go to police. What's your thoughts on that? What's the trend?
So the trend is towards more legalizing, or at least looking the other way. I'm doing my best to push back the other direction on it.
Thank you.
This is not a partisan issue up there. This is just a preference issue. There's Republicans and Democrats on both sides of this issue. I am pretty outspoken to say I worked with teenagers for 22 years before I went into Congress.
Right.
I never saw a single family that got better because the parents were smoking more marijuana. Not a single one. And so all these folks that say, well, you know what, they can make their choice, they can do everything else. I'm like, hold on.
Right.
If we have an option as a culture to say, are our roads safer, is our workplace safer, are our schools better if we legalize this, all three of those answers are no. Our roads aren't better, our workplace isn't safer, and certainly our schools aren't better with more marijuana out there. Last year, between the ports of entry, DEA picked up 64,000 pounds of marijuana being smuggled in the United States. 64,000, no, just on the southern border with Mexico and the United States.
64,000?
Yep. So all this talk about if you legalize it, then people just buy the legal stuff here is not true. The Mexican cartels are still shipping up marijuana here, and they know they can sell it on the street cheaper than what they can buy it in the dispensaries. And once it's on the street, law enforcement can't tell the difference between what was legal and what was not legal. So it's still an issue for me. There are two big pushes that are going right now. One of them deals with banking it, because marijuana is still a federal Schedule I drug. Banks can't operate. Is anybody here for banking that's here? Yeah. So banks have a big challenge on this because they may say, okay, we're not going to take care of some marijuana dispensary, some grow shop. We're not going to do that. But now there's the question of, if your electrician that banks with you also put in the electricity at that cannabis place, is that a cannabis business now? If you've got a somebody that owns like a shopping area, a strip center, shopping area somewhere, if they've got a cannabis business in it, but they've got lots of other rental properties around, for the bank, what do they do with that? We're trying to get clarity on that. It's one thing to say you're doing a marijuana business, and another one to say something else. There's an investment guy I talked to yesterday I met in Oklahoma City. His question was real funny. He said, I've been told as an investment advisor, I have all kinds of law firms and everybody that I work with. He said, but if one of those law firms has a lawyer in their practice that does legal counseling to a marijuana business, I can't, as a financial advisor, advise their law firm anymore, because they're maintaining a Schedule I business as well. Now it's ancillary, but they still do it. We've got to get some clarity on that, because there's going to be lots of people that are scooped up in that. That's a problem. That's a different issue. But for banks that have come to me and said, I need your help getting clarity so I can bank with marijuana business, I've just smiled at them and said, you're going to have to look for somebody else. I'm not going to help our state become more addicted to drugs. I'm just not going to do it. Because I think it just hurts us long term.
Yeah, I love it.
So,
That's right.
yeah. What else?
Is there not a piece in the legislation on the marijuana, and I forget how it's worded, but
The
there
Unity
is,
bill.
okay,
Yeah.
there's a piece of it that says this much funding is going to go to the school fund. And how does that compare with the lottery? I mean,
Yeah.
did Oklahoma Lottery not say specifically something was going to go to schools? Where
It
does that
did.
money and compared to this? Is what
It
I
did.
wanna
So
know.
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, the bill that just passed through trying to clean up the vote that happened before with the legislature, the state legislature, they were trying to figure out how do we follow what people were saying they wanted with medical marijuana, but also clean this up because it's a mess. Now, I've not gone through all that statute yet. That's on the state side to be able to see it. I've not seen all the details on it yet, but they're trying to provide some clarity, like getting a prescription. It could be any doctor, any place, for any reason, for any cause. Well, that's a problem. I mean, literally, it could be my left toe hurts every other Thursday, and so I need a marijuana prescription. Was legal the way that it passed. If some doctor would write a script for it, and there's no question, with the opioid epidemic that we have in Oklahoma, there are doctors that are willing to write scripts for lots of things. And so it'll be out there. So they're trying to provide some clarity to that. Some of the funding was to be allocated to schools if they had additional funding that wasn't needed for regulating the product. Remember that the tax on it is really, really low. The tax on it is a third of the tax of what other states have done on marijuana, of what was passed. So it's a very, very low tax that's on it. I'm doubtful any of that money ever gets there. If it does, I still go back to my same question. For folks that did catch me before the vote happened and said some of this money is going to go to schools, this will help our schools, my response to every single one of them was, okay, so what you're saying is, if more kids, their parents smoke more marijuana, our schools are going to be better. So our teachers should write a note home saying, we need more school supplies, I need you to go smoke more marijuana to go help us at our school. It's like, no one's willing to say that, but that's really what the argument was. To me, that doesn't help our schools long term, and it's a fractional amount. It's very, very small. It's very small even compared to what the lottery was. And remember the lottery, you're right. That funding was supposed to solve our school funding issue, and it most certainly did not. Now, there is funding that goes to our schools from the lottery, but it certainly didn't solve our school funding issue. By the way, go back decades ago, Oklahoma didn't do liquor by the drink, but we did it, and the additional tax money was going to schools, and that was supposed to solve our school funding issue. So we got to figure out how to be able to just do stable funding for our schools, period, and not have to say, We need more people smoking marijuana or cigarettes or drinking alcohol or playing the lottery to help our kids.
Yes.
Because I don't think that's ultimately what's going to help our kids the most. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Senator, I don't want to beat the marijuana thing to death, but as a banker, I would contend the reason we need clarification is we're already banking marijuana because we're doing business with the state of Oklahoma.
Right.
And a depository for the state as well as municipalities that are collecting fees for the licensing. So we're already doing business, so we're already in violation.
It's already moving around.
We're already in violation, so we've got to have some.
And there are individuals that work in marijuana shops that their personal income is going back and banking with you. And so it's different. I would say what Oklahoma passed the marijuana law is so different than what other states passed on that. And that's what we lose track of. I had folks that said to me, well, on our eastern side, they'll say, well, Arkansas has medical marijuana and has had it for a couple of years. We should have it. And I've laughed and said, in Arkansas, they have 5 total places in the state that you can buy medical marijuana. 5 in the state, and they scattered around the different regions, 1 spot in each region. Okay, we have several hundred in the state and growing right now. Because the way the law was written to be more like recreational marijuana, not like medical marijuana. And so it has greatly accelerated that in our state. It's very different. We're a lot closer to Colorado's recreational law than we are Arkansas's medicinal law. Anyway, yes, sir.
Okay, now, one more question on this, and then we can go on to something else, but how much authority, or how much authority are our officers maintaining to enforce the laws
Yep.
that were out there and that are out there for marijuana? I mean, even though, with the medical marijuana bill and that, how much authority are they still able to use?
It's just very hard to be able to tell once it hits the street what is legal and what is illegal, where it's purchased. Okay, so it's not like, do you have your receipt for your purchase? So there's a licensing requirement. If you're the medicinal user, you've got a personal license. You've got to be able to show that. If you don't have that, then they can enforce it by someone who has a quantity, but they can't really tell where they purchased it, but they do know they have got the quote-unquote prescription for it to be able to get it. And that's the only thing that they really have right now. And if they're moving large quantities, they can still be convicted as a dealer.
So, Senator Lankford, they have a license that is similar to our driver's license.
It is a little different than a driver's license, and it's different than a prescription on it, but yeah, it has to have a written piece of paper that designates them as a person that's authorized to be able to have it. That's correct.
Thank you very much.
Sure,
Sir.
yep. What else? Yes, sir.
What about defense? To the wall.
Defense or the wall? Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
When Trump started this thing, when he said, the Mexicans are gonna pay for it.
Yep.
All right, what he said to me was, he could pick up enough money from the trade deficits we have, from the Mexican drug cartel, whatever drug
Right.
that is, and whatever else he could get from the Mexicans. And so I don't think that, when somebody says he lied,
Right.
I think he was just saying, yeah, I can get it, give me some time.
Sure.
I'll get it.
Yeah. And I think that is a lot of his focus on changing NAFTA and trying to be able to balance out the North American Free Trade Agreement, the shift to what they're now calling the United States, Mexico, Canada, USMCA agreement replacing NAFTA, was to increase American purchasing here and to get more parts and manufacturing moved from Mexico here. Yesterday morning I stopped by, anybody that drives south out of Oklahoma City through Norman knows that giant Johnson Control manufacturing facility that's on the east side of 35. They make York air conditioners, rooftop units, all the rooftop air conditioning units for the entire North America, all comes from that one facility. So it's commercial grade, some residential, but commercial grade type stuff. That facility just moved their manufacturing from Mexico to the United States. So there is a transition of what's happening. What President Trump has said is, and I've heard him say it as well, is, hey, this is not going to be Mexico writing us a check. this is going to be pressure to be able to put on them to be able to get the money. Now, I said, people asked me from the very beginning, and they said, is Mexico going to pay for it? And I've smiled and said, it's United States defense. We have the responsibility as taxpayers to take care of our own defense. I don't expect Mexico to pay for the wall nor pay for our fighter jets. But if we can increase trade with them, if we can do those other things to be able to get income, that helps us in general. But I still say for us, it's our responsibility to be able to take care of our own borders. But we'll keep going. But I get it. I hear the same thing. President Trump and I have had that same conversation before. I was in a meeting with him last week for about an hour and a half, and we were going through a bunch of the trade issues at that time because trade is a really big issue for us, both with China, Japan, Mexico, and Canada. He's trying to get these trade issues resolved, and it's been a big issue for us. Yes, sir.
Well, out here where I live, Trump never told a lie. I mean, there's always something that he is saying, but expand that, and you can make it so it's the truth. You know, and I just don't understand why people can't figure that out.
President Trump is not careful in how he says stuff.
Oh,
And so there's no way of secret. So the media takes everything he says and parses it and splits it all up and says literally this and this and this and this is what it could mean. And so they're always fighting with him. I had the Washington Post and the fact checkers went off on me about 3 weeks ago because I said on the floor of the Senate, the tax bill that was passed last year, the first results are coming in for income after the tax bill changed. In fiscal year 2017, compared to fiscal year 2018, we actually, as a nation, went up $4 billion in revenue. So the tax cut happened, and everyone said the tax cut's going to happen, the economy's going to collapse, the deficit is all due to the tax cut. But if you look at fiscal year 17, in fiscal year 18, our revenue went up $4 billion. So the Washington Post folks went off on me on that and said, now technically if we look at these 8 months of this year versus these 4 months of the previous year, and if we look at what inflation would have been and all those kind of things, it actually would have gone down. And I stopped and I said, okay, what I said was fiscal year 17, fiscal year 18, those are the numbers that we have in right now, and our revenues went up. That's the kind of stuff they do to President Trump all the time. Now, like I said, he's not careful in how he says stuff, and he says a lot of stuff, and then comes back and changes it later and says, that's not what I meant to say, and went from there. But I give him the benefit of the doubt. That's just how he is. So, yes, sir?
Well, it also, when we listen to the news, nobody knows anything except the New York Times and the Washington Post.
I've noticed that.
Yeah. Well, who are the gurus up there that know all this stuff?
Yeah. They're a little self-appointed, by the way. Yes, sir.
What's your thoughts on the Mueller investigation?
So his question was the Mueller investigation. We could hear in the background there from Mr. Smith. I get why it happened. I really do. I served for 4 years on the Intelligence Committee. We spent a lot of time going through the background on Russia. Russia absolutely was trying to influence our election. No question. They've done this to every single NATO country. We were just the latest. But yeah, they were actively trying to work social media. They were actually trying to stir it. But here's the thing people lose track of. Russia's trying to mess with us all the time anyway. Russia feels stronger if they can make us weaker.
Of course.
So they're always trying to find areas where Americans disagree. For instance, remember the whole thing about kneeling for the NFL players? The Russian social media folks that are out there started, as soon as we started arguing about should NFL players take a knee during the national anthem, the Russians started playing both sides of that and accelerating it and trying to make it as loud as they could in America, trying to be able to stir people up. I compare the Russians to when we were in elementary school or junior high, and two kids were having a fight on the playground. There were the two kids having a fight on the playground, but there was also always that kid on the edge of the playground screaming, fight, 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 and trying to get people to come run to watch, right? Okay, The Russians are like that kid on the edge of the playground screaming, fight, 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 trying to get more people to come to the fight all the time. They look for areas where Americans disagree with each other. Race, religion, patriotism, whatever it may be, national debt. They find any issue we argue about, they take both sides of the issues and try to get more people to run to the fight on it. They try to divide us all the time. The elections were just one of those areas. Elections, by definition, you divide up the country. But the Russians are trying to divide people all the time. So some people think this election was all the Russians were trying to engage to help President Trump become president. They weren't. They were just trying to find a divisive issue for Americans. It's one of many issues they've engaged with. They did right after the election. The Russians had worked for a long time instigating a group of folks in Houston, Texas, actually. They found a group of patriotic Texans, and then they started talking to them about Islam and saying Islam is the problem and trying to build a big social media following. At the same time, they were targeting a bunch of folks that were Islamic in Houston and trying to build up their patriotism and their focus on their faith. They got both groups all whipped up into a frenzy online with all this dialogue online, and then unbeknownst to the other group, said, let's meet for a rally at noon at this Islamic education center on this Saturday.
Really?
And bring your stuff to protest. Well, both groups showed up to be able to protest, and both groups showed up, and the police were trying to figure out how to separate the groups here all of a sudden and figured out how to make this happen. It was completely operated by the Russians. There were no Americans involved in that. They were just trying to find people who could get stirred up, stir them up, and try to be able to literally create a street fight in Houston, Texas. They did this same thing in multiple other places as well.
That's sad.
They're trying to just divide us. That's what it is. So the Mueller investigation, I get the investigation portion of it. But they need to wrap it up, though. They need to get it done. If you remember the Iran-Contra investigation with President Reagan, that was 6 years long. 6 years. President Reagan was out of office when that thing was still wrapping up. So we can't have that. That's not good for the country. I would tell you, and the Republicans on the Intelligence Committee have said, we've studied all these issues, we've looked at it. Yes, the Russians were trying to attack us, but President Trump, as candidate Trump and his team, certainly were not working with the Russians. There was absolutely no collusion back and forth. If there was some random dialogue where some Russian came through and interacted or sent them an email, okay, I get that, but you can't stop that. That's somebody just reaching out, trying to find a way to connect with you. But you can only say he was not participating with, and he was not participating. So at this point, I think the Mueller investigation is getting close to wrapping up. I do think they're going to try to find some way to say you fired Jim Comey, and so that's obstruction of justice. We'll see what he comes out with, but I don't anticipate he's going to find any kind of collusion with Russia at all. So we'll see. Yes, sir.
Got a question concerning grain prices.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people in this room depend upon wheat as their main source of income.
Yes, sir. And it's not done well the last couple of years.
That's right. Really, it's gone down this spring, $3.40 or thereabouts, the current board price, telemeters. I served on the Oklahoma Wheat Commission, and the NAFTA was always, we were indoctrinated by our group in D.C., who is the U.S. Wheats.
Right.
But that was always a good policy for us, especially, and we developed it, wheat to Mexico. That really has been a good outlet. You know, we have to sell
Right.
half of our wheat in the United States because we only
It makes so
consume
much.
half of it.
But the rest of the world's grateful.
But now what's happened, and Russia and some of those other eastern markets are shipping wheat to
Right.
Mexico and beating our price, see? I don't know the details of this new plan of Canada and the U.S. I don't know the details of that. Is there anything in there that would prevent them from buying outside?
It doesn't prevent them from buying outside. It creates an advantage for them to buy inside, if that makes sense. So that the no tariff zone between Canada and the United States and Mexico for our agricultural products, our biggest challenge on wheat has actually been Canada more than it has been Mexico. Traditionally, we've done pretty well with Mexico. Now, Mexico has started shopping for other places because they got mad at the president for setting aside NAFTA and renegotiating it. We're in the process of now finalizing the USMCA, the new agreement. NAFTA will go away, and the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement will be the new trade agreement.
It's not enforced yet.
It's not enforced yet.
Okay.
It's not enforced yet. We think Canada will be the first one to vote on it, maybe us, and Mexico will probably be last on it. You know, they've got a new president and a new government. Our biggest issue on wheat is Canada, though. We would ship wheat to Canada, and when it crossed the border, the Canadian inspectors would grade it as livestock grade every time. Every time. And so we always fought with them because it's really a protectionist thing. We solved that, or actually President Trump solved that in the USMCA agreement to the inspection process to be able to come across to Canada, so we'll be able to sell more wheat to Canada now. So we want to be able to get things going back with Mexico again, but the wheat to Canada is a bigger issue for us. So, but they're on it. Soybeans to China was another issue over on the eastern side of the state. It's a bigger issue for them. Excuse me, deal with these allergies for a while. China just agreed to buy 10 million tons of soybeans from the United States, one large order.
China?
So it's a big order that they just agreed to be able to do. We've got multiple others. The president's now negotiating in his team with Japan, trying to open up beef to Japan because they've got a huge tariff on us in Japan that we've got to be able to knock down. And so they're in the process of trying to get that. So there's several different ag deals that are currently working right now. I've met with some of the members of Parliament from the UK and have been back and forth with them because this may not seem like a big deal, but our chicken has been blocked out of England and out of Europe because we clean our chickens with water with a little chlorine mixed in it to kill the salmonella. And the Brits don't want to do that. They say we have chlorinated chicken, it's poisonous. We're like, you know what? Our folks don't die from salmonella, your folks do. So we're going to try to figure out how to be able to solve that one as well. But there's several ag conversations that are going on with trade right now. How many folks in the area have switched from wheat to cotton? Because I know.
Very few in this county.
Okay.
There was an influx about 10, 15 years ago, but that's gone away.
Okay.
There's some up here in the northeast part of the county, because Anthony, Kansas has a gym.
Okay. Well, again, that's one of those things that everybody switches to cotton, and all of a sudden we get an abundance of cotton, and it drives the price of that down for a while. But cotton's done very well the last couple of years, but if you go back 5 years ago, cotton was doing terrible because we were oversupplying. China has actually, they do a 38% subsidy to their cotton farmers. So they way overproduce cotton. 60% of the world's cotton right now is sitting on the ground in China.
Really?
So it is a big deal
Yes.
to be able to figure out how to be able to manage China in this ag trade issue.
Well, China's got the largest stocks of carryover wheat in the world.
They do.
Have had.
Yeah, they've got 40%. Yeah, 40% of the world's wheat sitting on the ground in China as well. Now, it's lower grade, obviously, than what we do. It's the same thing with their cotton, much lower grade. But the fear is if they start dumping that on the market, it kills our market too. So,
Sure.
yeah. What else?
One more.
We run out of time?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Senator, I just, thank
Yeah,
you for coming, and,
Oh, there's probably the water. It just miraculously appeared. Thank you. It's like I either have Elijah's jar here.
I'm really glad I came this morning to remind myself how fortunate I am to not be in the legislature now that they're dealing with marijuana, so.
Yeah. It's a good time to be done.
I just wanted to put my Great Salt Plains Health Center hat on for a second and say thank you. We've received federal grant funding. Great Salt Plains Health Center, Alfalfa Electric Cooperative, Cherokee Public Schools are the three largest employers in this community. And Great Salt Plains Health Center now has over 80 employees, so that doesn't happen without your continued support at the federal level to make that happen. And there's no medical care available in our county without that. That's available to the public as well, in addition to the other places that health center now serves. Karen Hawkins, the mayor, is the one that put the group together to go after that grant 10 years ago. Madam Mayor, I believe that it was, and I just would be remiss to not thank the mayor and thank you for helping that continue to not only provide medical care for this county and others, but also the ability to employ a large number of people.
Yeah.
My question, though, is this: with all of the new direct flights to Washington, D.C. that have added in the last couple of years. We appreciate your sacrifice. You spend a lot of time away from your family. Do you feel guilty, though, having those direct flights?
No, don't feel guilty at all. In fact, there's a direct flight, there's now 2 direct flights, the Southwest flight and an American flight to D.C. from Oklahoma City. There's not one from Tulsa, and Inhofe, who lives in Tulsa, has said, how did that happen? 2 things I want to say to you, though, is thanks for all the work. The Federally Qualified Health Center is really important. That is a long-term strategy to be able to help provide health care in areas where we desperately need it. That is not like the Affordable Care Act. That's not like other areas that we've complained about. It's health care that gets to people in an extremely efficient way, and it's done well. And glad to be able to be a part of that. I'm glad to be able to support that. The only thing I'd correct you on that is Karen and I likes to be called Mukhtar. That is the new term on this.
I'm interested in the FQHCs
Yeah.
because it seems like there's always money for expansion. In 10 years, we have 4 clinics, and we're looking at 50. And I want to make sure we get that funding.
Yep.
Because it's a place that really needs it.
So it is funny, I've had folks that have caught me and said that FQHCs came out of the Affordable Care Act, out of Obamacare, and I've smiled and said, no, they're 30 years old plus as a strategy. This has been around a long time. How do you provide health care to folks that need it, that can't get access to it? Partnering with the communities, partnering with the different companies in the areas, finding efficient ways to deliver it. If we were in Stigler today, there's an old Walmart that the Federally Qualified Health Center has stripped out the facility inside that old Walmart, and has a pharmacy, it has eye clinic, it has dental care, it has behavioral health, it has medical care in it. They filled up that old facility and be able to use it in an extremely efficient way. It is remarkable to be able to see the inventiveness of folks that have done these Federally Qualified Health Centers all around our state, and we're up to 87, 85, where are we now?
Sites, yeah.
Yeah, sites, different sites around our state. Most of those by far in rural areas. Those that are in urban areas are in the highest need, greatest poverty areas in urban areas to be able to provide health care to folks. And they're family physicians, they're folks that are getting basic care. It's a really good investment. It's a good way to be able to deliver health care to folks that need it the most and can get it at an affordable price. So appreciate you going through the process. It's not a simple process on the grant process at all, but it has a long-term impact to be able to maintain that. I've got to run because I'm headed over to Advance and to be able to see how things are going at Advance today. Y'all all know Tanner, and he's around all the time. I am in D.C. more than I'm home, but when I'm home, I try to travel around the 77 counties as much as we possibly can. Last year was actually an odd year for me. The Senate was in session last year more than it has been in session in the last 50 years. So we were in D.C. a lot last year working through nominations and all that mess that we're going through. The Oklahoma legislature typically meets from February 1 to the end of May. The United States Congress meets 11 months of the year, and last year and the year before that we even met in August as well. Usually August is the 1 month we don't meet. We even met through August also last year. So it just kind of depends on what needs to be done and how much is going on in that. But we'll stay in contact and travel around as much as we can, but you'll see Tanner at a lot of events, and if there are ways that we can help, we want to help. I have folks all the time that contact me and say, how can I get a question answered? I get 150,000 emails a year. So folks that email me or contact me, I always say, I get to them as fast as I can get to them, but as strange as it sounds, if you want to get to me, make sure you've got Tanner's cell phone number. Call him directly and say, hey, I've got a question for the senator, and see if we can't chase it down and get you an answer back as fast as possible. That is actually the fastest way to be able to get a hold of me. And make sure that we can get an answer back to you as well. But there are a lot of things that are moving right now, whether it's trade, or whether it's healthcare issues, or whether it's foreign policy, or whether it's national security. There's a lot moving right now. So as you've got questions on it, bring it. We're glad to be able to provide some clarity on it, and we'll keep moving on things in the days ahead. So one quick thing as well, please don't lose hope. Keep praying for the nation. We were chatting before. I poke on people of faith especially, to say, we should pray more than we complain, and we catch ourselves complaining more than praying. That shouldn't be who we are. If we do believe in a God who's big enough to handle the problems that we face as a nation, we should live like it. And so I do encourage you to pray more than we complain. and to keep nudging on this. Though we're Americans, we complain about things. That's what we do. We go complain about things, we fix it. So I get that part of it, but let's stay engaged. All right, fair enough.